Imagine digging into the earth and finding a perfectly carved spearhead, one that predates our species by hundreds of thousands of years. Or discovering a cave painting so sophisticated, it rivals modern abstract art, yet it was made by hands that weren't quite human. What if everything we thought we knew about being the first intelligent species on Earth was wrong? We've even grown up believing Homo sapiens are the pinnacle of evolution, the final chapter in a long story of survival. But what if we're actually just a footnote? Hidden in ancient bones and scattered artifacts lies a much deeper mystery. We may not have been the first intelligent beings to walk this earth. Most of us grow up learning a very clean, very simple version of human evolution. Apes turned into early humans slowly evolved, and voila, here we are, Homo sapiens, the dominant species on Earth. But reality? It's messier, way messier. The more we dig into the past, literally, the more we discover that we weren't the lone stars of evolution. In fact, we weren't even the only humans walking around. About 300,000 years ago, Earth wasn't home to just one human species. There were at least 7, maybe more. Some had larger brains than us. Some were smaller and more agile. Some lived in icy tundras, others in lush forests. And yet, they were all human. Not quite us, but not entirely other either. Take the Neanderthals, for example. For decades, they were painted as brutish cave dwellers, the kind you might see in an outdated textbook or a cartoon with a club. But modern research has totally flipped that stereotype on its head. These weren't mindless beasts. They buried their dead with flowers, crafted tools, made jewelry, and even painted cave walls. Then there are the Denisovans, a species we didn't even know existed until 2010. Scientists discovered a single finger bone in a Siberian cave, ran DNA tests, and realized this wasn't Neanderthal, and it wasn't sapiens. It was a whole new species, and one we had interbred with. Today, traces of Denisovan DNA live on in people from Asia and Oceania, and that's just scratching the surface. There's also Homo erectus, who walked the earth for over 1.5 million years. That is 10 times longer than we've ever been around. And let's not forget the eerie mystery of Homo naledi, a small-brained human relative found deep in a South African cave. Despite their brain size, they showed signs of intentional burial and possibly symbolic behavior. So what does this all mean? It means the story of us, of humans, isn't linear. It's a tangled web of cousins, siblings, and ancestors. It's a history of sharing, fighting, mating, and learning together. Evolution wasn't a solo journey. It was a crowded path. And here is the part that really shifts your perspective. We didn't replace these other humans overnight. We coexisted with them for tens of thousands of years. In some places, we may have even learned from them. So why did they vanish? And we survived? That's the question that haunts archaeologists to this day. But before we get into that mystery, let us look a little deeper at who these cousins of ours really were, and how much of them still lives on inside us. What if I told you that your ancestors weren't just Homo sapiens, but included Neanderthals and Denisovans too? Sounds wild, right? But it's true, and modern genetics is the smoking gun. When scientists first mapped the Homo sapiens genome, they had a hunch. If we had lived alongside these ancient cousins, maybe, just maybe, we had interbred. The idea was controversial at first. Mainstream scientists resisted it, clinging to the idea that we were separate and superior. But then came the breakthroughs. In 2010, researchers compared Neanderthal DNA to people living today. What they found rocked the scientific world. Nearly 2% of the DNA in non-African humans comes from Neanderthals. That's right. If your ancestry is European, Asian, or Middle Eastern, you've got a little Neanderthal in you. It didn't stop there. Later studies found that people from parts of Southeast Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA up to 5% in some populations. That's a serious genetic legacy for a species we only know from a few fossil fragments. So what does this mean? First, it means interbreeding between species was more common and more important than we ever imagined. We weren't just coexisting with these other humans. We were making babies with them. Second, it means their traits live on. Some of the genetic code we inherited helps shape how our bodies respond to diseases, how we process oxygen at high altitudes, and even how our immune systems work. The Denisovan gene that helps modern Tibetans thrive in thin mountain air? That's an ancient gift, but it goes deeper than biology. These shared genes force us to rethink our identity. The idea that we, Homo sapiens, are pure and separate is a myth. Our family tree isn't a straight line, it's a braided river, twisting, merging, splitting again. We re-not a clean break from the past, we re a remix of everything that came before. And here's a thought. If these other humans live on inside us, even just a little, doesn't that make them more than just extinct species? Doesn't that mean, in some strange, poetic way, they're still here? In our faces, in our blood, in the way we fight infections or survive in extreme climates, our lost cousins still whisper through our DNA. And yet, they're gone. Every one of them. Gone, except us. So, the obvious question now is, why? If Neanderthals were intelligent, if Denisovans were thriving, if all these humans were so capable, what happened? What caused Homo sapiens to be the last species standing? Let's dive into that mystery next. So here's the big mystery. If there were once so many kinds of humans, smart, adaptable, resourceful, why are we the only ones left? Was it war? Disease? A freak twist of fate? Or were we the problem? Let's rewind about 50,000 years. Homo sapiens had just begun migrating out of Africa in large waves. As we spread into Europe and Asia, we encountered Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other regional humans. In some places, we peacefully coexisted. In others, things may have turned violent. Archaeological evidence hints at competition for food, shelter, and resources. Imagine two human species trying to dominate the same hunting grounds. One has sharper tools, stronger social networks, and maybe better communication. The other starts to get edged out, slowly, silently, generation by generation. Now, we're not saying Homo sapiens committed full-blown genocide, although some researchers have floated the idea. What seems more likely is that we simply outcompeted them. We adapted faster. We formed larger, more connected tribes. We developed symbolic thought, language, art, culture that allowed us to collaborate in ways no other species could match. In other words, we won the evolutionary race not just with muscle, but with imagination. But that victory came with a cost. All those other humans, the ones who shared our world, vanished. Neanderthals were gone by around 40,000 years ago. Denisovans likely faded not long after. Others, like Homo floresiensis, the mysterious hobbit people of Indonesia, disappeared quietly, leaving only bones and questions behind. And here's where things get a little haunting. What if they had survived? What would the world look like today if we weren't alone? If there were still other intelligent humans walking among us? Would we have treated them as equals or as threats? Would we have shared knowledge or tried to dominate them? It's hard to say, but one thing is clear. Their absence echoes through our history, not just in what we gained, but in what we lost. Because in the end, our dominance didn't come from being better. It came from being lucky, at the right place, at the right time, with the right spark of creativity, communication, and cooperation. And perhaps, if things had gone just a little differently, we could have been the ones remembered as the strange fossils in the cave, while Neanderthals watched the stars. Let us get one thing straight. The image of ancient humans grunting in caves and bashing things with clubs? Total garbage. That stereotype, the dumb caveman trope, has been repeated in movies, cartoons, and even some outdated school books. But modern science paints a radically different picture. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other extinct human species weren't just surviving, they were innovating. Start with tools. Neanderthals didn't just use sharp rocks. They built complex composite tools, like hafted spears, which involved binding stone tips to wooden shafts using natural glues and sinew. That's not brute force. That's engineering. In fact, archaeologists have found evidence that Neanderthals developed tools before Homo sapiens ever reached Europe. They had their own tool culture, the Mousterian toolkit, which included scrapers, hand axes, knives, and even tools specialized for woodworking and hunting specific animals. Then there's fire. Sure, fire has been around for a long time. Even Homo erectus used it over 1 million years ago. But Neanderthals may have mastered it in ways that suggest deep intelligence. They used fire not just for warmth and cooking, but possibly for creating better tools, warding off predators, and even for rituals. Oh, and let's talk survival. Neanderthals lived through brutal Ice Age winters. They made clothing from hides, used shelters, and were likely skilled hunters who understood animal migration patterns. That requires planning, memory, and communication, things we often reserve for modern minds. Even more surprising, there's evidence they may have cared for the sick and elderly. Fossils show individuals who lived long after serious injuries or illnesses, injuries that would made it impossible to survive alone. That means others must have looked after them. That's not animal instinct, that's compassion. So, where did the myth of the dumb caveman come from? Mostly from ego and bad science. For decades, early researchers assumed that if these species went extinct and we didn't, we must have been smarter. But the more we study, the clearer it becomes. They weren't stupid, they were different. And in some ways, maybe even more advanced than we thought. And here's a chilling thought. If a Neanderthal were raised today, in a human family, with access to education and language, who's to say they couldn't succeed, even thrive, in our modern world? What if the line between us and them is thinner than we ever imagined? Here is a question most people never ask. When did we first start thinking about things that don't exist? Not food, not predators, not tools, but ideas, stories, spirits, meaning. The answer? Possibly before Homo sapiens. Let's start in Spain. Deep inside the El Castillo cave, researchers found a series of red dots, some in a row, some arranged in shapes, painted onto the walls. These markings were tested using uranium-thorium dating, and guess what? They're over 65,000 years old. That's before modern humans even reached Europe. So who made them? The only known humans in Europe at that time were Neanderthals. That is right, the same species we once dismissed as grunting. Brutes may have been the first artists on Earth, and it doesn't stop there. In other caves, we found hand stencils made by blowing pigment around outstretched fingers, engraved bones, possible symbolic jewelry made from eagle claws and marine shells. All this suggests something huge. Neanderthals may have had symbolic thinking, the foundation of language, culture, and religion. They weren't just reacting to the world, they were imagining it. Let that sink in. Meanwhile, in Asia, mysterious carved shapes and etched patterns have been linked to Denisovans, though the evidence is still thin. But if confirmed, it could mean that multiple ancient species were exploring art, ritual, and symbolic thought at the same time as us. And what about Homo naledi? Despite their small brain size, these ancient humans may have intentionally buried their dead. In a South African cave system called Rising Star, researchers found dozens of remains placed in deep, dark chambers, possibly as a kind of early funeral practice. That would be mind-blowing. Why? Because burial suggests awareness of death. It suggests grief, respect, maybe even a belief in something beyond life. Now, skeptics argue over the evidence. Was it really art? Were those really graves? Science always needs more data. But one thing's becoming clear. We didn't invent meaning. We inherited it. The human imagination. That spark that creates culture, spirituality, and stories may not be just ours. It may have been kindled long before Homo sapiens ever drew a line on a cave wall. And that changes everything we thought we knew about what it means to be human. So now we know. Our ancient cousins weren't slow-witted shadows of ourselves. They were innovators, survivors, artists, maybe even spiritual thinkers. And yet, they're gone. Why? The truth is, we don't have a single smoking gun. But we do have clues. Some scientists believe climate change played a major role. Ice age cycles that reshaped landscapes, wiped out prey animals, and made survival brutally difficult. Others think it was a slow squeeze. As Homo sapiens spread across continents, we may have pushed the others into smaller and smaller ecological corners, until there was nowhere left to go. And then there's the blending theory. Remember those traces of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA? It is possible that some groups didn't go extinct in the traditional sense. They were absorbed into our gene pool. Over generations, interbreeding may have slowly erased the separate identity of some species. We didn't destroy them. We became them. Or at least, part of them lives on in us. But even with those genes inside us, something still feels missing. It's like walking into a room and realizing someone important isn't there. Someone who should be. Imagine a world where Neanderthals built their own cities, where Denisovans explored philosophy, where Homo floresiensis developed unique art, stories, and mythologies of their own. Imagine what it would be like to share this planet with multiple intelligent species, each with their own worldview, their own languages, their own dreams. It's a haunting what if, but maybe the real lesson isn't about what could have been. It is about what still can be, because the story of our species didn't start with us, and it doesn't have to end with us either. Understanding these ancient humans reminds us that intelligence, empathy, and creativity aren't uniquely ours. They've been part of Earth's story for hundreds of thousands of years. We just happen to be the ones still writing it. So the next time you think of early humans as less evolved or primitive, remember the red handprints on cave walls, the buried bones, the jewelry, the tools. They weren't echoes of something lesser. They were sparks of something greater, and they're still flickering in all of us. We like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, the smartest, most capable species to ever walk the earth. But what if we're not the climax of the story? Just the latest chapter? The deeper we dig into our ancient past, the more we realize how much we don't know and how much we've misunderstood. Our extinct cousins weren't just side characters in the story of Homo sapiens. They were co-authors of the human experience. They hunted, they built, they painted, they dreamed, and they mattered. Their DNA runs in our blood. Their innovations laid the groundwork for our own. Their silent disappearance reminds us how fragile survival really is, and how quickly dominance can slip through our fingers. So the next time you hear someone call Neanderthals dumb, or see a caveman joke in a movie, remember, they were humans too, just like us. And maybe, in ways we're only beginning to understand, we're still a little like them. If this made you look at humanity a little differently, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten chapters of our species. What do you think happened to the other human species? Would we live differently if they were still here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're curious about the next layer of this mystery, check out our upcoming video on the cities that time forgot. Lost Civilizations Before History. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay human.